All right, I think we'll begin here. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Julie Pareto. I'm the president of SHFG. Welcome, fellow members and dear Library of Congress guests. Welcome to this year's Society for History in the Federal Government Awards ceremony. Each year, volunteers from across the federal government seek out and highlight the best examples of our work. It is no easy task. Federal historians across many agencies and roles undertook amazing projects in 2023, and the product of their efforts becomes all the more remarkable as we consider the rising challenges of resource and recognition felt across our sector. The exemplary projects we highlight this afternoon speak to the unyielding service both to the field and to the public, and those who study and share federal history. With thanks to our many volunteer judges, I welcome the awards chair, Leslie Poster, to the stage to present our first honor.
Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. I'm delighted to share the good work of our colleagues with you all through our annual awards program. We have much to celebrate, but I ask that you please hold your applause to the end of the ceremony, and then I promise we will make up for lost time. I'm proud to present the first award, the Award for Special Service to the Historic Profession, one that we give not for annual accomplishments, but for a broad legacy of excellence. In its 25th year, we honor the Save America's Treasures grant program. Save America's Treasures has done just that, directly supporting major museum collections and historic resources. In doing so, the program uplifts the best examples of our rich shared history and the highest standards of our work. I am pleased to welcome to the stage Megan Brown, Hampton Tucker, Lola Claremont, Jacqueline Clements, Lindsay Alston, and Seth Tinkham. Your first step, so thank you. And then I'm just going to put you all to the side for the flag. Okay. Congratulations. Congratulations. So much. Thank you. Congratulations. And with that, I will welcome to the stage Felicia Wivchar, current Vice President and long-serving awards chair, to present the next honor.
Thank you, Leslie. Our next honoree is receiving two honors this afternoon, both our Member Award and our Book Award for neither confirm nor deny how the Glomar mission shielded the CIA from transparency. M. Todd Bennett has focused on studying the history of U.S. intelligence throughout his career. In fact, his research for this book dates from his time working on the Foreign Relations of the United States volume on National Security Policy, 1973 to 1976, as an historian and division chief with the U.S. Department of State. The Book Award Committee was impressed with Dr. Bennett's ability to take the best parts of government-backed research and augment it with additional sources, resulting in a well-rounded and comprehensive text that serves as a case study for government transparency. Neither confirm nor deny also weaves together several strands of federal and institutional history. As a result, Todd is a worthy recipient of the SHFG Book Prize. Separately, the Member Award Committee valued how the book's intriguing topic has appeal for both a general and scholarly audience and felt that the work's combination of quality primary research and clear presentation of a complex situation are deserving of this year's Member Award. Todd, please join me on stage. Oops. Thank you. Driven by the rainbow. Oh, here we go. Thank you. This might be the other one. There we go. Here's your second. Congratulations.
Next, I'll welcome Mandy Shalhoub to present the Award for Initiatives in Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Accessibility.
This year's award for initiatives in DEIA, recipient is Melissa Jane Taylor, a primary driver inside the Department of State behind efforts to research, understand, and draw thoughtful lessons from the often sobering history of diversity and inclusion in the Foreign Service, the Department of State, and the U.S. government as a whole. She has consistently championed efforts to research the context of both major successes and major setbacks, and efforts to promote values of diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility over the 235-year history of the Department of State. And now, that important work is her main purview, a testament to the importance of the work, the broad demand for that type of knowledge, and her persistence. Melissa Jane, please join me on stage.
Our next presenter will be Matt Reagan, giving the prize for article or essay.
Okay, so Neil Hernandez's innovative article, Labor Secretary Frances Perkins Reorganizes Her Department's Immigration Enforcement Functions, 1933 to 1940, Going Against the Grain, provides a window onto an understudied area of U.S. history, giving valuable insight into how bureaucratic processes and rulemaking shape the ways that agencies function. It focuses on topics that are often discounted for being less than dramatic, but Hernandez makes a compelling case that the everyday work of managing the Department of Labor's budget and procedures nonetheless indelibly shaped the history of immigration, and does so while making an excellent use of government sources to present statistical data. So please, Neil, join me up on stage.
Our next presenter, Jordan Grant, will be giving the Historic Preservation and Exhibitions Award.
Good afternoon, everyone. After years of planning construction, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency has created a new museum exploring the agency's multi-decade efforts to steward the nation's air, water, land, and public health. The National Environmental Museum and Education Center, now open on Pennsylvania Avenue, provides visitors with 1,600 square feet of new interpretive space, with offerings that range from classic graphic and text displays to a mobile lab to AV screens featuring 75 new videos exploring the agency's history. Visitors get to hear directly from EPA alumni through oral history interviews, and they get to see the fascinating objects that illuminate the agency's history, which range from oyster shells to a pen used to sign the Clean Air Act amendment. The museum's team's commitment to transform an underused area in a federal building into a vibrant, visitor-friendly, and accessible space all deserves our celebration. It's my great pleasure to welcome to the stage Joanne Amorosi, EPA Communications Director, to accept this honor.
Thank you very much.
Our next presenter will be Richard Hulver, presenting the Excellence in New Media Award.
Hi, everyone. The National Park Service History Collection at Harpers Ferry, to celebrate its 50th anniversary, created content spanning many different digital projects, an innovating virtual tour of their artifact collection, an artifact-driven history series called 50 Nifty Finds, and an engaging story map of a 1923 cross-country road trip featuring many visits to MPS sites called Keeping Up with the Johnsons. The project is a successful demonstration of how a federal history office can celebrate its own past with a critical eye, while simultaneously showing how the federal government interacts with public life in a meaningful and accessible way. The recipients are unfortunately unable to join us, but we celebrate them in their absence.
I'm confident that we have some applause left bottled up, so please join me in congratulating all of our fantastic award winners. And with that, I will welcome back to the stage Julie Prieto.
All right, and thank you very much to Leslie for putting this all together. It's amazing work. All right, it's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker. In his role as Principal Deputy Librarian of Congress, J. Mark Sweeney provides executive leadership to advance the priorities of the Librarian of Congress and exercises library-wide program and management authority to ensure effective delivery of the library's collections and services to the Congress and to the American people. During his 34-year library tenure, Sweeney has served as Associate Librarian for Library Services, Director of Preservation, Chief of the Humanities and Social Sciences Division, Chief of the Serials and Government Publications Division, Chief of the Preservation Reformatting Division, Head of the Newspaper Section, Reference Specialist, and Supervisory Library Technician. He served as the library's technical advisor to the United States Newspaper Program and as the library's Program Manager for the National Digital Newspaper Program, cooperative initiatives with the National Endowment for the Humanities to enhance access to newspapers through the application of digital technology. Mr. Sweeney has presented at numerous professional meetings and serves on national and international boards and committees. He's earned a BA in History from McGill University and an MS in Library and Information Science from the Catholic University of America. Please join me in welcoming Mark Sweeney.
Thank you, Julie. Good afternoon. And on behalf of Dr. Carla Hayden, the 14th Librarian of Congress, it's my pleasure to welcome you here to the library today. As you know, founded in 1800, the library is the nation's first federal cultural heritage agency. So history is very much in the DNA of the Library of Congress. And I'm delighted to introduce today this year's Roger B. Trask awardee and lecturer, Dr. John Y. Cole. As the library's first official historian, John is going to speak to you today about some of the people who've gathered, preserved, and shared the library's rich history over the years. But first, I'd like to share some highlights of John's successes in increasing public and scholarly understanding of the library over the course of his distinguished 55-year career. A librarian and a historian, John began his career at the library in 1966. A decade later, his articles about the development of the library's dual role as a legislative and a national library brought him to the attention of Librarian of Congress Daniel J. Boorstin, who appointed John first as chair of his reorganization task force and then as the founding director of the Center for the Book, a new private-public partnership approved by Congress and President Jimmy Carter to promote public interest in books and reading. During his nearly 4 decades as director of the center, John was instrumental in shaping the many significant Library of Congress national programs, including Read More About It, the Library of Congress and CBS television project, the congressionally authorized Books in Our Future study and project, Letters About Literature, a reading and writing contest in which approximately 1 million students participated, the Year of the Young Reader, and the Books and Beyond author series. Most of these projects were amplified through a nationwide State Center Affiliates program inaugurated by John. With help from the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Center for the Book Regional Network now supports reading, library, and literacy projects in all 50 states, the District of Columbia, and 5 U.S. territories. John's knowledge of the library, his dedication to it, and his incredible supply of energy have been reflected in other significant achievements. He served as co-chair of the library's 2000 bicentennial celebration. He was instrumental in creation of the first National Book Festival the following year, and he paved the way for its immense success over a quarter century. He significantly expanded programs for young readers with the launch of the National Ambassador for Young People's Literature program. A tireless ambassador for reading and literacy, John organized and launched the Library of Congress Literacy Awards program in 2013. He established an advisory board of literacy experts and served as the board's first chair. Through the generosity of philanthropist David Rubenstein, the program has distributed more than $3 million to 150 organizations in 39 countries. John is the author or editor of more than a dozen books and multiple articles about the library, most recently, America's Greatest Library, an illustrated history of the Library of Congress. John has been honored with numerous awards, and in 2011, he was allotted an honorary volume co-published by the University of Texas Press in association with the Library of Congress that described him as the foremost expert in the history of the Library of Congress and marked his achievement as a scholar, historian, and founding director of the Center for the Book. Finally, John continues to support the library as a generous benefactor. In 2013, John and his wife, Nancy Gwynn, established the Library of Congress Center for the Book, John Y. Cole and Nancy E. Gwynn Fund, to help sustain reading, library, and literacy projects all over the country, and it was recently expanded to support projects related to the history of the Library of Congress. Please join me in extending a warm welcome to Dr. John Y. Cole. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mark. It's nice to be home. I really appreciate being able to give this talk today for the Society. The Trask Award is a notable event, and what it signifies for me in some ways is the capping of a career, a little extra cap on the extra part of my career, and I'm really happy to be here. This also is a perfect opportunity to review how the Library of Congress has managed its own history, one of my favorite topics, of course, but also to consider what the future might hold as far as the library and history are concerned. The Library of Congress is often described as a guardian of the nation's memory, as we know, but it's never had, as has been discussed already, its own official historian or even its own history office. Yet over the course of its 224-year history, generations of in-house historians have served as guardians of the library's memory. This group consists mostly of staff members, including me, but also with contributions from outsiders, some are here, and also subject specialists and consultants. So it's really been a strong mixture of people interested in the library, often employees who decide to do something about the history of their own activities as well. But what I'm offering today is really in part a tribute to all unofficial historians, past and present. While there have been gaps, which are clear, in the nature, partially because of the part-time nature of the work, I think that overall, we've represented the institution pretty well. It isn't the same as an official historian, but we've covered the waterfront pretty well. But before I get into the work of the Guardians, all Guardians, I'd like first to explore two unique and important but often overlooked aspects of the library's history. The first is the close statutory relationship between the library and the nation's executive branch agencies, beginning with the Office of the President. The second is the library's 1898 Appropriations Act, which gave the Library of Congress permanent authority to establish the institution's rules and regulations, thus enabling the library to assume a greatly expanded new national role. Today, the library's dual role as both a legislative and a national entity makes it an unusual U.S. government agency. Because of its enormous size and wide diversity of its collections, it is one of the world's largest and most significant research institutions. Moreover, many of the general services are free and available to the public, locally, nationally, and internationally. I also think it's worth noting that this complicated, multifaceted institution of more than 3,000 staff members has somehow captured the wide-ranging mission in a succinct 20 words. Here they are, quote, "To engage, inspire, and inform Congress and the American people with a universal and enduring source of knowledge and creativity." President John Adams signed the act creating the Library of Congress in 1800, but only 2 years later, in 1802, Congress decided that the President of the United States, not Congress, would appoint the Librarian of Congress. Thus, this new government agency, definitely part of the legislative branch, would have a special relationship with the President and, as the bureaucracy grew, with executive branch agencies. It started with the presidency, however, and in addition to John Adams, 3 other prominent U.S. presidents have played especially important roles in shaping the institution: Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and Theodore Roosevelt. And it's no surprise that the papers of these four presidents, along with those of 19 others, are now available in the library's manuscript division. The library's special relationship with the executive branch reemerged in 2001 when First Lady Laura Bush became the co-founder of the first Library of Congress National Book Festival. In 1830, Congress granted Library of Congress borrowing privileges to the Secretaries of State, Treasury, War, Navy, and the Postmaster General, as well as to the Secretary of the Senate, the Clerk of the House of Representatives, and even former U.S. presidents when they were in the District of Columbia. Nor can we forget the Supreme Court. Congress granted the justices of the court access to the library in 1812, launching another continuing relationship across government lines. In 1936, the library provided 25,000 duplicate volumes from its law library to help establish the Library of the Supreme Court, a new Capitol Hill neighbor. And no surprise, the papers of several of the most prominent justices are now in the library's manuscript division. A final example from the 19th century is of special significance. After a disastrous fire on the Mall in 1866, the Smithsonian Institution transferred its entire library to the Library of Congress, which had recently added 2 large rooms to its cramped quarters in the U.S. Capitol building. The 40,000-volume Smithsonian Library was the foundation for the Library of Congress's science collections, as well as its foreign journal collections, and eventually for its worldwide international exchange program. The second unique element of the library's history, which I mentioned earlier, relates to the Joint Committee on the Library. The legislation creating the library in 1800 also established the Joint Library Committee, the oldest continuing joint committee of the U.S. Congress. Its original purpose was to oversee the purchase of books, furnish a catalog, and devise and establish the library's rules and regulations. In 1811, it became a standing committee to be appointed each session of Congress. One result was that the committee chair became responsible for the overall administration of the library. The committee's key job was to choose and acquire the library's books. Thus, at the time, the Librarian of Congress had nothing to do with book selection. The committee chair took the lead, usually joined by one or two committee members. So prior to the Civil War, the library was a modest endeavor with a small staff. Its collections of books, newspapers, and maps emphasized current topics of congressional interest, mostly law, politics, economics, geography, and history. Committee members generally agreed with this relatively narrow focus. In fact, in the 1820s and 1830s, committee chairs Congressman Edward Everett of Massachusetts, Senator William C. Preston of South Carolina, both failed to get approval for overseas acquisitions of considerable value, as well as for certain reference materials from American publishers. Furthermore, the library languished from 1846 until 1862, the period when Senator James A. Pierce from Maryland was the chair of the committee. A conservative, domineering chairman with Southern sympathies, Pierce viewed the Library of Congress as little more than a limited service gentleman's club. However, his rather obscure death in 1862 is, for me at least, a turning point in the library's history. Pierce's death gave my eventual library hero, the new assistant librarian, Ainsworth Rand Spofford, his first opportunities to begin transforming the institution. When Spofford became assistant librarian in 1861, the Librarian of Congress, a political appointee, quickly left him in charge of the small 7-person library, which was crowded then into the unfinished U.S. Capitol. During the next 2 years, Spofford, a former Cincinnati journalist, editorial writer, and literary entrepreneur, came to a surprising conclusion. His tiny, relatively unknown library was in fact an unrecognized national institution. He described the situation succinctly in an article he published in 1864, stating, "The United States will never possess a public library which can fitly be called national until Congress shall take a more liberal view of the value and the importance of such a collection." That year, 1864, when the position of Librarian of Congress suddenly became available, Spofford sought the post himself. Badly needing political support, he turned directly to the members of Congress he was serving and soon sent forward endorsements from no less than 22 senators and 87 members of the House of Representatives. That certainly did the job, for on the last day of 1864, President Abraham Lincoln appointed 39-year-old Ainsworth Rand Spofford to be the 6th Librarian of Congress. Spofford was to serve as the energetic and influential Librarian of Congress from 1864 until 1897. His principal achievement during those years was nothing less than establishing the dual legislative and national nature of the government institution that he headed. I've studied Spofford for years, but I am still learning and I'm still in awe. Among his many accomplishments, 2 were of central importance. First came the centralization of all U.S. copyright activities at the library in 1870, a task helped along by his Ohio friend, Congressman Rutherford B. Hayes, who also happened to be an influential member of the library committee. His second major achievement, a huge one, was to persuade Congress, starting in 1871, of the need for a separate building for its new National Library, at least in his view, the new National Library. The monumental structure, now known as the Jefferson Building, opened to an admiring public 26 years later, on November 1st, 1897. In late 1896, with the construction of the building virtually completed, the Joint Committee held 4 days of public hearings about the library and its future. Spofford and officials from the American Library Association were the key witnesses. The result, outlined in the 1898 appropriation, effective on July 1st, 1897, included major appropriation increases, a large boost in the staff from 42 to 108, and an administrative reorganization that reflected the national role envisioned by Spofford. During his 32 years as librarian, Ainsworth Spofford effectively co-opted the Joint Committee, the Joint Library Committee, enlisting its members to support his National Library cause. Primarily for this reason, the House Appropriations Committee transferred the responsibility for making the library's rules and regulations from the Joint Library Committee to the newly empowered Office of the Librarian of Congress, an authority Spofford had successfully assumed without asking. The Joint Library Committee assumed a new advisory role, and the Librarian of Congress was given new legal authority and independence to shape the institution in the best way that he or she saw fit, subject to congressional approval, of course. However, Congress itself was also given a new role. For the first time, the president's nomination of a librarian would need Senate approval. By prearrangement, the 72-year-old Spofford stepped down as Librarian of Congress on July 1st, 1897. To the institution's benefit, he did not leave, serving as Chief Assistant Librarian until his death in 1908. Obviously, he had been too busy making the library's history to worry about recording it. That was to be left to his principal successor, Herbert Putnam. Putnam, the former director of the Boston Public Library, served as Librarian of Congress for a record-breaking 40 years, from 1899 to 1939. The first professional librarian to head the institution, he was the candidate recommended by the relatively new American Library Association, and President McKinley agreed. Putnam greatly expanded Spofford's accomplishments, especially in services to the nation's libraries. The staff grew from just over 100 in 1899 to more than 1,000 when he finally retired in 1939. Like Spofford, Putnam was fearless in promoting the library's national role. Two of the presidents he convinced were Theodore Roosevelt, who praised Putnam's National Library plans in his first State of the Union address in 1901, and Warren G. Harding, who in 1921 approved Putnam's scheme to transfer the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution from the State Department to the Library of Congress for permanent possession and display. Putnam, an outsider, was well aware of the library's historical role. In 1899, for his new bibliography division, he hired William Dawson Johnston, a former history teacher at Brown University. One of Johnston's first assignments was to edit a new series of books on American library history. The hefty first volume, History of the Library of Congress, Volume 1, 1800 to 1864, was published in 1904. Unfortunately, Johnston left the library in 1907, and there was never a second volume. It also was unfortunate that his single volume, largely a valuable collection of important documents from the library's early history, ended in the year 1874, just before the eventful Spofford era got started. Nonetheless, William Dawson Johnston had, in effect, become the library's first staff in-house historian. He was followed in this capacity by another early Putnam administrative appointee, Frederick William Ashley, who eventually served as Chief Assistant Librarian from 1927 until 1936. Ashley wrote an excellent historical summary in a 1929 volume honoring Putnam. However, the manuscript of Ashley's unfinished history of the institution lies quietly among his papers in the manuscript division. In fact, it's not far from the unfinished manuscript of the planned second volume of the library's history, which William Dawson Johnston left behind when he departed in 1907. In 1939, President Franklin D. Roosevelt named a successor to Putnam, writer and poet Archibald MacLeish, who was Roosevelt's ally and actually a part-time speechwriter. In his Senate confirmation, McLeish easily overcame opposition from the American Library Association, which wanted another professional librarian to be Librarian of Congress. Relishing the library as both a people's house and a symbol of democracy, McLeish became an effective and inspiring Librarian of Congress and an eloquent spokesman on behalf of libraries and librarians as the U.S. entered World War II. In 1942, Lucy Salamanca, a well-known magazine writer and also a library staff member, published an informative but lightly documented general history of the library aptly titled Fortress of Freedom. In his brief foreword, Art Librarian McLeish notes that since no history of the Library of Congress has been written, it's exceptionally fitting that Salamanca's story of the library should come to the attention of the American people at this time. The library's next and perhaps best known in-house historian, David C. Mearns, first started working at the library in 1918, directly under Putnam. I first met Mearns in 1969, 3 years after I joined the library's staff. By then, I had fallen in love with the library's history, enrolled in an American Studies PhD program at George Washington, and was shopping for a dissertation topic. Mearns had recently retired as chief of the manuscript division after a distinguished 49-year career as an administrator, writer, and unofficial Library of Congress historian. His informal history of the library, The Story Up to Now, published in 1947, was a classic account, but one with a slant. It was written to show Congress that the library indeed had national roots. He told me, when I visited him, he told me about Spofford, described him as a key but relatively unknown librarian and suggested Spofford become my topic. I happily agreed, secured his support as an informal advisor, and began a friendship with David Mearns, which lasted until he passed away in 1981. Along the way, he presented me with the prized possession, a heavily used but still legible calling card from Ainsworth Spofford, dated 1893, which of course I immediately framed. In addition to books on the library's history, major anniversary years increasingly provided an opportunity to commemorate the library's past. The Library of Congress marked its 150th anniversary in 1950, always easy to remember those dates. By today's standards, the celebration was a bit on the meager side, but for historians, it was notable on a couple of counts. Herbert Putnam, who was to pass away the next year at the age of 91, was present and gave a memorable talk, concluding with a tribute to none other than Ainsworth Rand Spofford. Throughout the entire year, the intermissions of the radio broadcasts of the library's evening concerts featured Mearns, Librarian of Congress Luther Evans, and Assistant Librarian Werner Clapp in a series of discussions about the library's collections, programs, and its history. David Mearns also contributed a lively introduction to a slim, attractive catalog of a small historical exhibition in honor of the anniversary. The first page is a letter from President Harry S. Truman to Librarian Evans invoking the spirit of Thomas Jefferson and congratulating the American people upon their library's sesquicentennial. These books, by the way, are on display in the back of the room later. Prior to the library's 175th anniversary in 1975, my LC fingers started to twitch. I had started a biographical essay about Spofford for an anniversary issue of the library's quarterly journal. I then suggested to the head of the library's publishing office that similar newly researched biographical essays about the 10 other librarians of Congress be commissioned for publication during the anniversary year or shortly thereafter. She said fine if I would help her recruit appropriate authors who could meet needed deadlines. I agreed, and I was pleased that indeed we were able to make it happen. a compilation of the articles in book form with the not-so-creative title, Librarians of Congress, 1802 to 1974, was published in 1977. My first book, For Congress and the Nation, A Chronological History of the Library of Congress, was published in 1979, but I was just getting started. The leading library staff in-house historian in the 70s and early 80s was Charles Goodrum, who was one of the directors of the Legislative Reference Service. A talented writer and mystery novelist, Goodrum crafted two different popular histories of the library which sold well commercially and were later reprinted. The first was a 1974 volume published by Prager and reprinted in 1982. Larger and more ambitious was a color-plated coffee table volume, Treasures of the Library of Congress, published by Henry N. Abrams in 1980. A revised and expanded version appeared in 1991. And when Chuck Goodrum asked me to prepare reading lists for both of these titles, I was flattered. The anniversary celebration of the library's bicentennial on April 24th, 2000, was a lively year-long affair. Historian James H. Billington had been appointed Librarian of Congress in 1987 by President Ronald Reagan. I began pestering Dr. Billington about the forthcoming anniversary soon after he was appointed, and thus I was not surprised when he appointed me, along with the Chief of Staff, as the co-chair of the Bicentennial Steering Committee. Our year-long theme was Libraries, Creativity, Liberty. Throughout the year, Dr. Billington's energy and his fundraising talents were evident through a wide range of celebratory national events such as Local Legacies, Living Legends, and you'd better believe, Gifts to the Nation. The library also provided research help and space for writer James Conaway to prepare his elegant popular history of the library, America's Library, the story of the Library of Congress, 1800 to 2000, published by Yale Press in association with the library. Back in the 1980s, I started a series of informal staff-oriented discussions about the library's history. Guests were welcome, and one of them was Jane Aiken, a graduate student at the University of Michigan who was searching for a dissertation topic. Her work eventually centered on the crucial years of LC's development from 1896 until 1939. A few years later, the University of Illinois Press published her excellent book, The Nation's Great Library, Herbert Putnam and the Library of Congress, 1899 to 1939. She and I became colleagues, and I persuaded her to join me as the co-editor of a major new compilation I tentatively titled The Encyclopedia of the Library of Congress. In the end, this part-time project almost became overwhelming. It took 9 years to complete before publication in 2004 by the library in association with Burnand Press under the title Encyclopedia of the Library of Congress, for Congress, the Nation, and the World. It's a one-volume, 567-page reference work with more than 200 illustrations, but it included newly prepared essays by more than 40 Library of Congress subject specialists who wrote brief histories of their administrative histories along with histories of the collections, which is something is really important at the library. Appendices included historical lists of senior library officials, legislative appropriations, collection growth, major gifts and endowments, and the chairman of the Joint Committee on the Library. Fortunately, Jane's interest in the history of the library blossomed as never before after 2016, when she retired from her position as a director of research programs after a successful 30-year career at the National Endowment for the Humanities. Drawing on and expanding her past work and detailed knowledge, she decided to undertake a brand new one-volume history of the library through the Billington administration, which ended in 2015. Her readable and scholarly volume, detailed footnotes and all, will be published later this year by Georgetown University Press in association with the library. And I'm pleased to note that Jane is with us today. In 2016, David Mao, the acting Librarian of Congress, took the important step of appointing, for the first time in library history, an official historian, me. I served in the post for a fairly short interval before retiring from the library in 2021 after 55 years of service. I look back on my 5 years as historian with some pride for what I accomplished and some regret for the work that remains. One of my most significant accomplishments was the expansion and updating of my 1979 chronology, which was published in 2018 as America's Greatest Library, modestly titled, An Illustrated History of the Library of Congress. The book was very well received and was recently reprinted and is one of the top-selling titles in the LC shop. I also worked with the library's Office of Communications to develop a timeline of LC history for the website and also made some long overdue updates on the website. As Mark mentioned, I welcomed new library employees with a brief history of the library during their first day orientation. I engaged a librarian participating in the library's leadership development program to research and document the library's history needs, thus beginning the process of making the case for establishing a permanent history office with modest resources and dedicated support. I stayed in close contact with Cheryl Fox in the Manuscript Division, trying to support her work with the all-important Library of Congress archives. And I continued to review primary source documents and compile research on the history of the Center for the Book and the emergence during the Billington administration of a big number of library public-facing initiatives. It would have been all too easy for the office of the historian to fade away after my retirement, but we are incredibly fortunate to have a powerful advocate for federal history in Principal Deputy Librarian Mark Sweeney, whom you've met. Mark is committed to the reestablishment of a permanent historian position within the publishing office this time. In the interim, he has made funding available for two important major engagements with the library's Federal Research Division that will help guide the library's strategy and staffing on oral history. Thank you, Mark, for that. And our efforts have been significantly bolstered by leaders of this society, which has provided invaluable guidance and support. So to all of you who are helping as guardians of the history of the Library of Congress, thank you. I have never been more optimistic about the future of history at the Library of Congress. The story of this great institution will continue to be recorded, preserved, and shared for years to come, and there is no doubt that history's lessons will continue to benefit the library's leaders and the American people. Thank you. Thank you. Well, thanks very much, and I think we have a little time for questions. I would be happy to clear things up that I sailed over, or try my response to any of your questions, maybe about the uniqueness of the Library of Congress's history, and somehow that has been a challenge, I think, to history and to historians. So it's kind of become departmentalized in a way, people getting interested in their particular part of it, but not so much with the overview, which is why we're so lucky to have Jane's volume coming and have other people more interested in the library as a whole. It's a pretty hard organization to get your arms around, I must say.
Could you say a few words about Werner Clapp?
About what?
Werner Clapp?
Oh, I can. We had a picture of him one time here. Werner Clapp was kind of a soulmate of David Mearns, and they came to the library, and they both worked under Putnam, and they started as what we called in my day deck attendants. But they gradually worked their way up, both of them, to higher administrative positions But they shared an interest. One of the first things I remember is they did a little booklet on the story of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence coming to the library. And when I came as an intern, that was one thing that I liked learning about. Werner Clapp went on to the administrative department and became really an expert in things administrative, where David Burns was a historian at heart and became kind of a Lincoln expert and published books about Lincoln, but they remained a team and really good friends. But Werner, whom I did meet also at this time, really was a candidate to become the Librarian of Congress, and that must have been in 1954. And there were reasons that he didn't get it, and there were kind of as political reasons. He offended some members of Congress, but it was unclear. But it turned out that this was the day when the librarian was, this was a presidential appointment. It was Eisenhower. And Werner did not get the job. Instead, it went to L. Quincy Mumford. But Werner was a very innovative person. He decided that he would leave the library and establish the Council on Library Resources, which was created in 1956. And in fact, from my point of view, it really became initially a wing of the Library of Congress in providing private Ford Foundation funding for projects that either the library was too timid to push forward, or it was the McCarthy era, and there also was McCarthyism stuff going on all over the place. So it was a safer place to operate with the Council on Library Resources. And CIP, all kinds of cataloging programs were really funded initially by the Council on Library Resources. So a pattern developed with pilot private funding for projects that were tested, and then later, if they worked and the politics were right on it, they became part of the library's programs, cataloging and publication, all of these. So that was actually a pattern that continued as the role of the private sector increased, and librarians of Congress got smarter in some ways. I think the library, what's really interesting to me, one of the things is the Librarian of Congress initially was a lifetime appointment, and it was all the way up until Dr. Billington, and after he stayed a long time, Congress decided to limit it to a 10-year term. But in the meantime, very qualified, interesting people brought something, as librarians, brought something to the institution, and they were able, by and large, to be persuasive if they were smart enough or clever enough or something, because they had the power. Remember back in that 1898 appropriation, the power to govern the library really went to the office of the librarian, and Congress lost that power, but they gained another power. The committee on the committee has remained an advisory committee for the library, and some librarians have used it and some have not. So it still exists, and it's still a good thing because it links us to Congress. But that's kind of how I got started. But Werner Clapp makes me think of all of that, because he's the one who said, okay, I didn't get the job, I can help the library in a different way, and he did. Other questions? Okay, well, it's been a pleasure, and thank you, and we can chat a little later. Thank you again.